President Biden getting ready to unveil his proposed $6 trillion budget later this morning. His plan would reshape the economy with expected spending increases in education, healthcare, social services, as well as infrastructure, which the administration says is an investment in the American worker. Joining us right now is Squawk Newsmaker, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh. Good morning to you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate you being with us. Want to talk about this plan and really want to talk about whether you think that this plan is just the beginning of a massive negotiation and where it really ends, because we've already heard from the other side of the aisle, and they're not happy. And of course, there are questions even within the Democratic Party whether there's going to be agreement.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. And secondly, it's unfortunately that we have sides here. This proposed budget by the president is an investment in the American people, investment in the American economy, and it's about the future of America. And President Biden's economic plans have been working up to this point. We've seen some growth in jobs, people coming back to work. We've seen people being vaccinated. We've seen our economy beginning to move. And these are just investments that the president's proposing that's going to continue to move our country forward.
Mr. Secretary, how do you think about the issue of debt and deficits in this day and age? I know that there are remarkably low interest rates today, but we've started to see them creep up, and I think that there's concern that they could continue to creep up, and if they do, the cost could be dear.
Well, you know, I think the president has talked about tackling the deficit. He's talked about it when he rolled out the American Jobs Plan. I think he's the first president in quite a while now to actually be talking about taking on the debt. I think it's important that as we think about spending and as we think about building the infrastructure here in this country, when I say infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and bridges, I mean the cares economy, I mean job training, workforce development. The president also wants to tackle the debt. He doesn't want to add more burden to it. The American Rescue Plan did, and what he's talking about now is moving forward, laying down infrastructure and taking on that debt. I think that's important. I think that that's fiscally responsible what the president is doing here. And I hope that everyone understands, when I say everyone, I'm talking about the legislative body, they understand the importance of being able to do both, make investments in the future of America, but also tackle the debt so that the future of America is not paying that debt down.
Hold on. Just back up. You believe that this budget tackles the debt? How so?
In the president's plan for the American Jobs Plan, we talked about raising the corporate tax rate. That corporate tax rate would pay for the American Jobs Plan, but also start to address the deficit that he has inherited.
I think there's a big question, though, about just how much the government is currently spending and how much we will spend. Let me just ask you about the current state of affairs, which is to say there is going to be some unspent money and as a function of the rescue package, and a view that should be effectively pulled forward into something like this, or even into the infrastructure plan. Do you think that's the appropriate way to do it?
I think obviously everything's a negotiation, and if we're not spending the money, what we can do is either pay down some debt with that money, or we can pay it forward and move forward here. Again, assuming not all of the American Rescue Plan will be spent. Many cities and states around the country might not spend it all, and that money should go back. And we should be looking at negotiation, having these conversations. That's part of the legislative process. I spent time.
But do you think that should change the dynamic of, for example, the tax plan? I mean, that's where this gets interesting, right? Because you say to yourself, okay, well, maybe I'll actually have more money than I thought I had, and then you say to yourself, well, then maybe I don't need to tax everybody the same way that I needed to if I needed more money, or no?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. It's too early to tell what money would be left over after the American Rescue Plan. We won't know that for quite some time. I mean, it's the money's still just, in some cases, just getting down to states and just getting down to cities, and they're coming up with spending plans on how to make those spending plans in their cities and towns. So it's still too early to say that. I think as far as what the president rolled out the other day, these are major areas that need investments in this country. They haven't been touched in a long time. And the president is doing that to continue to move our economy forward.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.